Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sarah DeFlumery, and it's my privilege to welcome all of you to the 9th Annual Ethics Lecture. And it's part of the Program for Ethics and Leadership and Integrity in Action, founded by the generosity of benefactor T. Marc Futter. And for students, there will be a sign-up sheet in the back if you missed it in the beginning. And there is also going to be literature tables for Francis and Sarah, and Allison will be, I think, showing something instead.
Someday I'll have a book.
Of course. I would like to recognize and thank our provost, Dr. Melissa Morris Olson, for attending, and Catherine Futter and her father, who are members of the Futter family, who are here to kind of commemorate the whole founding. And then Dr. Leary will have a few words to say before I introduce our speakers.
Good. Thank you, Sarah. Sarah, thank you so much for starting us out so well, because it really is my pleasure to be here today with all of you. This program, as Sarah told you, was started by T. Marc Futter, but I'm going to give you the story behind the story. When I first came to Bay Path, this is now back in the end of 1994, one of my assistants told me there was one man I had to meet. Now, that is quite an introduction, and that one man was T. Marc Futter. So she introduced me to him, and an immediate friendship occurred. He became a member of our advisory council, which is a group of ambassadors who come to meetings 3 or 4 times a year and then share the news of Bay Path all throughout the region. And he was probably one of the very best ambassadors we could have ever had. If you would know Mark, he was very genuine, he was very generous, but he had a twinkle in his eye, and he had a quick step, and he had a fabulous sense of humor. Around 2006, so now we've been friends for, 8 or 9 years, he said to me that he wanted to start something very special. A program in ethics, a program all around integrity, because he really believed that at a women's college, and many of our women were going into fields where you have to make some very difficult decisions, he wanted his imprimatur, his imprint, regarding his belief, his strong belief that one of the most important characteristics that any human being could have as a professional and as a person would be to be ethical. And so through his generosity, we began this program. And over the years, several faculty have led it here, and we've had these wonderful lectures every year. And I would like to thank Mike Moran and Ann Dobmeyer in particular, because they have been the burning light that has kept this program at such a high level. And today you're going to have 3 incredible speakers. But I also have to say a very wonderful welcome to John and to Catherine. And you've been at many of these events, and you have seen the impact that a lecture series like this can have at a college like Bay Path, or a university like Bay Path University. But we have some very special people, and I don't mean to single one out, but Frances Crowe is a legend in our region, and I think our other speakers would agree that she is. And I've had a chance to review this wonderful book that she has written, Finding My Radical Soul, a memoir. And but I have something about Frances that you should know, and I hope you don't mind me telling this. But she just celebrated a very important birthday. Now, I think any birthday is important, but Frances, on behalf of all of us, can I mention? Is it 96? 96 years old. So happy birthday to Frances. But you will hear today from 3 very different perspectives, and all of these individuals have found world peace to be part of their lives. Conflict resolution, spreading the word about community building, and you will learn from each and every one of them their own unique perspective. So, know that you're in for a treat. I am so glad so many of you could be here. And I'm going to ask all of you to do one thing for me. I want you to listen really carefully to all of our speakers. And if you can remember just one important concept, one important thought that you will take home with you and share with somebody in your family, or that you will take to your class tomorrow and share with a classmate, the word of these three women will be spread far and wide. And with that, I'll return the program back to Sarah. Thank you very much.
And I think Mr. Futter would be very excited about our Living an Ethical Life theme this year. And so our three speakers, as I'm sure everyone is aware, are Frances Crowe, who's sitting here in the center, Reverend Sarah Pirtle, who's off on your left, and then Allison Roberts, who's here. So Frances Crowe, she was, just a little introduction, she was raised in Missouri in the 20s and 30s, and she became a peace activist during World War II, then counseled men who were brought into the draft during the Vietnam War, and how to kind of get out of the draft by having a conscientious objector status, which is taking a moral stand against war. And right now she's working on going against nuclear power and nuclear issues locally in New England. And then Sarah Pirtle is a peace musician and writer, and she's written numerous books, and she advocates for many different causes, and most recently was the Keystone XL pipeline, and she did found the Discovery Center for Peace Building in 1992, which runs many programs aimed at bringing awareness to individuals through interconnectedness. And then finally, we have Allison Roberts. She's a 2013 graduate of Smith College, and she worked with Frances Crowe during her undergraduate work. And she ended up living and working with a Catholic peace community, and then moved on more recently to working with the Cooperative Metropolitan Ministries in the Boston area. So I hope you enjoy their speeches as much as I will. And so I'll pass it off to you.
I'm very honored to be here, and thank you for inviting me to speak on living an ethical life.
Let's just check. Can people hear? You can. Oh, great.
I am very inspired that there is a college with a dedication to promoting ethical living. And I Googled ethical colleges in America, and two came up, Pomona College in California and Bay Path College. I knew John Futter in the 60s when he was in school with my elementary school in Northampton at the day school, then it was called, in Tom's class. Life is not easy these days, but I feel that you students have important work to do in your life to build the new society in the shell of the old, because the old isn't working. And students all over the country are working hard to engage in the work that you have. I have 5 grandchildren, all in their 20s, and they're all doing important work. And I wrote my memoirs really for them to understand kind of who they were and why they were the people they are. I have my oldest grandson is in medical school in St. Louis, and after he finished college, instead of going to medical school right away, he went to work for AmeriCorps in New Orleans after Katrina. And then he came to visit me, and I had been ill, and he came to take care of me. And then he went out to California and decided he would take an EMT course to explore medicine, and got into a program at Berkeley, UC Berkeley, a pre-med program. He had not been pre-med as an undergraduate. He had been in anthropology. But at UC Berkeley, they have a program where they take people who've taken a couple of years after college to work in something like AmeriCorps or an inner city position, and who had worked in anthropology. So he got in the two-year program at UC Berkeley in pre-med, and he got jobs right away, one in the San Francisco emergency department room as a scribe for when the patient came in. He stayed with the doctor and put everything down. And the other one at Oakland 2 days a week, and then 1 day a week he worked in the cardiology lab of a doctor. And so that he was well prepared when he got his ready for medical school, and he applied and was accepted at St. Louis. And then he was chosen to be one of the 4 students to work in St. Louis in a free clinic in the black community. And the first thing he did, he got wonderful pictures of all the black healthcare workers in St. Louis and put them framed them beautifully around the walls of the waiting room, so that his center is not a Ferguson place. He has been very supportive of the students at Ferguson, but he is deeply involved. And I have one who is the next age was a psychology student and got a master's at Naropa University, and now works in Naropa teaching psychology and working particularly with young children. And I have then the next granddaughter is head of AmeriCorps in Portland, Oregon. And she's applying for a position with the new Peace Corps when she finishes AmeriCorps that the president has suggested, a domestic Peace Corps. And another one is just graduating from Colorado College in pre-med, and another one doing wilderness education out in Colorado. So they're all very service-oriented in their lives. Life is very stressful, I think, because your life is surrounded by the corporate media, always coming after you to buy this, do this, dress this way. All of these things will make you successful and happy and comfortable. Which is not the focus, I feel, in life. So living ethically in this means thinking of everybody, all living things on the planet, as someone that we want to be thinking about all of the time. I think about all of the refugees from the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. And what would it be like to be living in those countries? In fact, we have our Northampton Committee to Stop War has brought over a woman from Iraq who learned English by watching a television in Baghdad. And she's now graduating from Smith College next year. And she has done very well, but, she worries about her family. They've gotten out, and they're now in Amsterdam, but, they lost everything they had. But, that's just not what we think about very much. And I think if you can develop a vision of the kind of life you want to live, and begin, working, volunteering when you get out of college. And I think, if you're in a college where you get the skills to write and to speak and understand what's going on in the world, you're very well prepared when you graduate to maybe to think of developing a vision where we all have healthy food and health care for all, clean water, clean air. I've just noticed the last 2 days, it seems to me that the air is cleaner than it has been for a long time, that the atmosphere is wonderful. And we need housing for all, free education to prepare for a better life for all on the planet. There is enough for all. We need to build communities where we can work together, helping one another to develop our conscience. Some of the things we do not need are more weapons and more prisons. I want to read to you a little easy essay by Peter Morin, The Case for Utopia, Better and Better Off. The world would be a better place if people tried to become better, and the people would become better if they stopped trying to become better off. For when everybody tries to become better off, nobody is better off. But when everybody tries to become better, everybody is better off. Everyone would be rich if nobody tried to become richer. And nobody would be poor if everyone tried to be the poorest. And everybody would be what she or he ought to be if everybody tried to be what he and she wanted the other fellow to be. I think that's a very good, easy essay for us to think about. I began my journey of awakening when the War Department, I refuse to call it defense, it doesn't defend me, and it used to be called the War Department, bombed Hiroshima. I was living in New Orleans then. My husband was 3.5 years overseas, a physician in the infantry. And he was coming back then. He was on a troop transport that came into New Orleans once a month. So we lived in New Orleans. And I supported World War II. And I was a counselor in a women's college in Missouri. And at Pearl Harbor, I really got caught up in, the horror of war and decided I wanted to go work in defense of the country, I thought. And I didn't want to go into the military. And I saw a little article in the New York Times saying that they were developing, the War Department was developing a program to send women back to colleges at Mount Holyoke for the summer to learn the skills of working with people during the war. So I joined that program and then went to work, and I was a graduate student in New York working at Bell Labs, helping women who were working on radar. But gradually, living in New York and reading a little newspaper every day, PM, I began to understand a little more about what was going on, and particularly with the bombing of Dresden and Tokyo. And, it's mostly the civilians who were being killed. I was beginning to feel that there would be a better means of for governments to negotiate an end of war instead of bombing. And that was before Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr., so that nonviolence is really a relatively new term and philosophy. And my husband was planning to become a radiologist, so he had heard a rumor on the boat that we had developed this very dangerous nuclear bomb, that they had split the atom and it would kill thousands of people at once. And Tom was so appalled by that. He had, we talked about it, so that he was out when that information came through, when I heard on the radio that we had dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima. And, they thought 300,000 people had been killed. And I was just so appalled. I remember I was ironing a placemat, and I unplugged the iron and literally went on the streets of New Orleans looking for some kind of a solution. Well, I didn't even know what to call what I was looking for, but I found a used bookstore, and the manager said I should start reading Tolstoy, that this was an emerging science, nonviolence, and I would learn much. And so I did, and then when Tom came back, then he got out of the Army. Then we went to Rochester, New York, where he was going to study radiology at the Strong Memorial Hospital. So we were thinking we could find a peace group there and work to try to stop war and stop nuclear weapons from being further developed. And he found out that the head of the radiology department had been head of the Manhattan Project. And so, it was, we didn't do that. We had a victory garden and started our family. But, soon after we ended up in Northampton because our second child was born profoundly deaf, and we wanted to educate him by living at home and studying at the Clark School for the Deaf, the world's very best school for oral education. And he profited very well. We lived across the street from school, and he went to Clark. And that was before the Disabilities Act, and it was very hard. And he had a variety of schools that he went to, but he eventually finished and graduated, became a marine biologist, and has recently just retired. But one of the first things when we got to Northampton, I learned that by a friend that there was a Women's International League for Peace and Freedom that had been founded in The Hague in 1916, and it's going, next year will be its 100th anniversary. But women came from all over the world then to try to stop World War I. Well, they weren't successful, but they, have been very vigilant and working. And so I said, why don't we start a Women's International League in Northampton, which we did. And the first year, we got 75 women in Northampton to sign an ad that this was in 1962. 125 women signed this. We entered the new year resolved to raise our voices for life and sanity, for schools, for medical research, for patient and unremitting international negotiations against the shelter program. That's when they were testing weapons in the atmosphere. They were getting school children to climb under their desks. Against nuclear testing, against the whole arms race, which imperils our hope for the future. We focused on workshops for young children, giving them a paintbrush instead of a gun, and high school conferences on, I remember we had them on racism, militarism, and on the future. I remember one year it was called Living in a World We Did Not Create. And it would be that appropriate now, too, I think. But we grew, and we were the fastest growing Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. But then the women's movement emerged, and people were in affinity groups and consciousness-raising groups. And so that many people, instead of working on that, they were ready to go back to college or to graduate school or get jobs, and, it was what they were doing. And so then, my kids were growing up, and I remember our son Tom often with friends sitting at the kitchen table after school talking about, the war that they would be when they were 18, they would have to register and might go to Vietnam. So I thought, I don't know anything about the draft, and I think I'll go off to Philadelphia to the Central Committee for Conscientious Objection and take a draft training course, which I did. And I came back, and then I visited some draft counseling centers, and it seemed to me they were all run by angry young men with torn jeans and in those days. And they were, telling people how to fail the physical, how to go see a psychiatrist, to figure out how to get out, whether they should go to Canada, whether they should cut off the first index finger. And I thought, this is crazy. This isn't what I want to do. I want to sit in a circle, and I went to the university and took a course in group counseling. And I said, I want, people to come and sit, and we will talk about war, and we will, find out what it is they're objecting to and where that came from, and help them become conscientious objectors, which I did. And, so we got, I tried to put an ad in the local paper about this, and they said, oh, it's against the law. And I said, no, it isn't. You talk to your attorney. Well, they called me in a few days and said, yes, I was right. Well, I put, like young men, are you conscientious opposed to participation in war in any form facing you on moral, ethical, philosophical, or religious grounds if you hold the moral, ethical, philosophical objection with the same degree of intensity as one would hold a religious belief? You qualify for being conscientious objectors. Well, not many people understood that law. I think most draft boards even understood that law. So I put the ad in the paper, but nobody saw it, or I didn't hear from anybody. So I had an old mimeograph machine. I had to crank out, cut a stencil, way before the days of Xeroxing. And I took it to, and I decided Monday after the kids all got off to school, I was going to go out on the highway and pick up hitchhikers. That was before the day that there was public transportation. And students didn't have cars, and students, Smith weren't allowed to have cars. So I took, my flyers that had about the groups and when we were doing these sessions and how you got to my house. And I picked up a load of young men going to UMass down by the Coolidge Bridge. And I said, what are you going to do about the draft? And they all had, the very sick answers. And I said, I talked fast and drove slow and handed back my literature. And so I did that back and forth all day until, the next day I did the groups on Tuesdays and Thursdays afternoons and Friday nights. Well, the next day I had a room full of young men. And we continued that as long as the draft lasted. And they came in, they filled out a form about what it was, what their status was. But you had to, when you said you were conscientious objection, then they gave you a folder that you had to take what was the basis of your belief, where did it come from, and who supported you. And then after you had handed that in, then they called you for a personal appearance, and they asked you, crazy questions like, what if somebody tried to break into your mother's house? And we said, first of all, my grandmother is very able to take care of herself. She doesn't have a gun, and furthermore, that's not war. We're talking about war. And so, they were well prepared. Well, actually, of all the people, the first year I worked, I had 1,776 appearances in the office. Many people came 3 or 4 times. That's not the total number. But nobody went to the war. And we had people in the military who came to get a CO discharge. One person went to prison. He was a young man, Kevin Toll, up in New Hampshire. He was only 18, and he was determined not to register and really wanted to go to have the prison experience, which was hard for him. He was not prepared for it, and he thought he was going to be a vegetarian and wasn't going to work in the prison, but that was not possible. But when the draft was over, Sarah Pearl and I and others started the Mobilization for Survival, that we were working on nuclear power. And they were talking about building a nuclear power plant up in Vernon, Vermont, and Kevin and the tower had been toppled at the proposed nuclear power plant on Montague, and that what was his name?
Sam Lovejoy. Sam Lovejoy.
Sam Lovejoy. He, they were a group of people living out in Montague, and he had graduated from Amherst College, and they were trying to build the new society on the land. And on Washington's birthday, 50 years ago, he went out on the 22nd of February, a very cold night, with a boat cutter, and got up to where the loud high tower had a blinking red light on it. They were testing the error and something, and it was a terrible place for a nuclear power plant right there on the floodplains of Montague. But he cut the bolts, the guy wires holding up the tower. And he was lucky because the first one, it whipped around and it didn't decapitate him. He was down underneath it. Well, he toppled the tower, and then he walked back to Route 63 and hitchhiked into Montague, and actually got a ride with the police officer who said, what are you doing? Oh, and he said, I just toppled the tower at where they're going to be trying to build a nuclear power plant. And so I'm sure the police officer probably thought he was mentally disturbed. But when they got to the police station, he said to the officer, look out, do you see the blinking tower? And he said, no. So anyway, he was charged, and there was a trial, but it was It was a wonderful outcome. But the important thing of that trial, I feel, of all of this, was to show the individual initiative of power of one person. He really sparked the anti-nuclear movement in this country. And the judge one time, when they were calling witnesses, and one of the was Howard Zinn, was a witness. And Howard Zinn, who writes wonderful, wonderful books, a wonderful, historian of nonviolent action, to the witness stand. And the judge was so impressed with Howard Zinn. I think that one of the reasons, then the judge actually just declared it a mistrial because it was a matter he had been charged with danger to private property, and it wasn't private. And so, anyway, but then the judge did say to Howard Zinn after the trial, I want to stay in touch with you. And so for years, once a month, he went in to Cambridge and had lunch at Harvard Square with Howard Zinn. But, you don't know how your action will affect the people around you. But then we worked, to try to stop the Trident submarine, the Polaris. We were trying to get at wars, and the wars in Central America, and new weapons system. So that AFSC asked me if I would be willing to be an area office. So I did become an area office, and we continued to work on issues. And Trap Rock was founded through the Freeze campaign, where we were trying to reduce and get rid of nuclear weapons. And now we're up for the Non-Proliferation Treaty Review. The things that we had agreed to do 40 years ago, we haven't done, and we're getting more and more nuclear weapons. So when I retired from AFSC, I decided that what I really wanted to work on was getting Democracy Now! How many of you know about Democracy Now! It's a wonderful, wonderful radio program out of New York every Monday through Friday that was started in 1996, I think, by Amy Goodman, who wrote the foreword by my book. But she is hard-hitting, very non-corporate. She takes no money from corporations, and she's on the air every morning, Monday through Friday at 8 o'clock on the radio, and also on television. And is it on in Longmeadow? And you can access it all day long on your computer. And anyway, Amy, I decided that I really felt the important thing was for people to get the correct information from Amy Goodman every day. So I saw her in New York at an event, and I asked her how I should go about it. And she said, well, first of all, you should go after National Public Radio, that I call National Pentagon Radio, because it really does, I feel, support the War Department. And well, I went to Martin Miller, and he said that it wasn't their kind of programming. Then I went to Alan Shartok at WAMC, and they said it wasn't theirs kind of programming either. So then I went to all the colleges, trying to get them to broadcast, and the students were mostly interested in their own music and polka, or WMUA likes polka, and I couldn't get them interested. So then someone came to me at the vigil one Saturday, a couple of weeks later, who said, Frances, I'm broadcasting Democracy Now! Every day from the top of Mount Holyoke. 4:30 to 5:30. He said, I download it on my computer, and then I take it on a backpack with a portable transmitter, and I drive up as far as I can go on Mount Holyoke, and then I put this on my back and I walk up the rest of the mountain. Well, this wonderful friend, alas, has MS, and it was getting hard for him to do all of this. Plus, it was getting fall and they were going to close the road. So I said, I will try to help you to get it in Northampton. And I thought, so I went to all of the tall buildings in Northampton. No one wanted to do that. Only the First Church said you could broadcast from our steeple, but it wasn't the kind of place that Ed could climb up in the steeple. So I said, why don't you come to my house on Monday? And I think we'll throw the antenna up in my walnut tree, because I'm higher than downtown, and we'll see what works, which he did. And he drove around town almost to Amherst, and it was coming through very clearly. So I said, all right, I will get a carpenter who'll put a tower in the backyard, and I will buy a transmitter, and we'll be in business. So about 3 weeks later, I was on the air every Monday through Friday, illegally, and I had little cards made saying, listen to Democracy Now!, learn the truth of what's going on in the world, from Amy Goodman, and 4:30 every afternoon. Well, a lot of people were listening. If for a couple of times he wasn't able to download it, and we didn't get on the air, or he'd be late, and people would call, where's Democracy Now? So a friend at Amherst said, I will help you. And he sent an email to everybody on his listserv saying, withhold your contribution to WFCR if they don't broadcast Democracy Now! So in 1 week, we got $40,000 withheld from WFCR. So Martin Miller called me up and said, Frances, we must talk. So I went over, and he said, I will download it and stream it over to the college radio station if you get them to broadcast it. And so I went to the college station. I had to join the station, and they said, sort of, what's this old lady doing here telling us what's this? And they were not very nice. They wouldn't make eye contact with me, but we found a student and a little money where we could, she could work with the students more, and we got people who had programs on to use segments of Democracy Now! So after a year, they decided to do it. Well, recently they had an anniversary of their broadcasting, and Amy Goodman came up, and they filled Bowker Auditorium. We had a wonderful program, but they said nothing has been better for that station than broadcasting Democracy Now! Well, then the people who had helped me with it, my station, decided that they wanted to get a radio station in Northampton. So they got Sut Jolly of the Media Education Foundation to help them. And so he wrote a proposal. So they got the program. We now have WXOJ 103.3 on the FM dial. Very good community-powered radio station. And they broadcast Democracy Now! Every afternoon at 5. But then we got our community television station. Their contract was up for renewal. And Comcast didn't want to have anything to do with Democracy Now! but I knew that it was up for renewal. So I went to see the mayor, and I said, if you renew the contract with democracy, without democracy now, I'm going to have a sit-in in your office. And she knew I was serious. So she did. And and now they broadcast Democracy Now! Every day at 12 noon, actually 12 noon, 7 at night, at midnight. And so that 5 times a day we get Democracy Now! And it has really changed the culture of Northampton, I feel, to be getting the truth every day. And I will hope that you can do something about that. I don't think it's on in Springfield, West Springfield, or Holyoke, and it would be great if it could be done. But from there, I thought, what I really want is to show films weekly so that people can come together. And that's when DVDs were just coming out. And the Media Education Foundation in Northampton had just taken over the old firehouse. And they put a little in the discussion about this in the Gazette. It said they're going to have a community room downstairs for people to use. So I called the Media Education Foundation and I said, could we reserve it for Friday night, every Friday night, to show a film, free film, and have a discussion? And so Sut Jolly, they had thought that was a good idea. And that's when the film Bush's Brain just came out, and other DVDs. And so we started, and people came, and we didn't have refreshments. We said the talk, the dialogue, is what people need. And so we actually did that for 10 years. We started with the horror stories, and then I said we need to show films about what's really the good things that are going on in the world. And that's when we showed the series of Force More Powerful, the films that were made by WGBY in Boston on, the civil rights movement, the United Democratic Front in South Africa that ended apartheid, really, and solidarity in Poland, the Danes under the Nazis, and Pinochet in Chile. And they're wonderful films. Each is just 30 minutes, and we would, and then people were empowered to think of what they could do. But I think, we've had to stop it at MEF because they sold the first floor of the MEF. But we do films at the library now, which is a very good place. The Forbes Library is kind of the community center. And we're trying to figure out a regular time but we show them Saturday afternoon and Monday nights. And we're showing one this Saturday afternoon called Trashed. It's a film, a DVD about the dangers, the health effect of all the trash that we're accumulating on the company. But, I was getting my education deepened, and I thought, the problem that we can't stop war, our lifestyle depends on war. And I came across an eco footprint questionnaire, which I have copies of on the table, that I hope you will take. You can see what your lifestyle is doing to the planet. And so that, slowly I decided that I had to change the way I live. So I don't do air travel. I eat local produce only. I'm a vegetarian. And all the food the corporations sell comes mostly from California, Florida, and Mexico. It looks beautiful, but it's raised by people who are working with pesticides, cancer-causing pesticides, and Cesar Chavez, 50 years ago, went on a 46-day fast to get the pesticides out of the farm workers, and the farm workers are not paid very well. So that I feel, eating food that isn't local is kind of the abolition movement that it depends on slavery, I feel. And so I go to the farmer's market, and you get wonderful vegetables that are grown without pesticides. I try to walk in town as much as possible, and when my washing machine, Maytag washing machine, broke down, I think 10 years ago, I said, I'm not buying another washing machine. I'm going to go down to the river. So once a week, I go to the laundromat and do my laundry and bring it home. And I don't use my clothes dryer. I've retired it. I hang my clothes in the summertime outside, in the wintertime inside. We tried to set up a campus carpool system. Solar Dago, we called it. It didn't work because everybody's so addicted to being, where they want to be when. And we even, students at Smith made muffins, and we stood out on the highway and said, park your car here, have a cup of coffee, a muffin, and carpool. Well, nobody stopped. This is the challenge, and to keep my house about 60 degrees. So it's not easy, but it's doable. One of the reasons I did it, I think, to prove to my family and young people that it was doable. It's hard, but it's possible. And then our work now with the Vermont Yankee, the nuclear power plant that had sort of exhausted the time they were supposed to be open. And they upgraded it to go on struggling, and there have been many accidents there, and so we organized a Shut It Down affinity group. We're all older women. We are, know what we're doing. We meet once a month at a potluck at my house and decide what the action is. But many of us have been arrested many times up there. What we do is shut it down. It's a symbolic action. We chain ourselves to the gate, and that's the picture on the front of the book. I'm walking up to the gate. But for a while, we got some publicity and some press, not anymore. But we finally it alerted people to the dangers of the plant, and it was shut down. But it was just kind of the persistent faith of a group of older women, I think, that has helped a lot. So that, that's one of the things I'm working on now. But, what I want to say to you all as ending is that, once people believed in human sacrifice, not anymore. Once people believed in slavery, not anymore. Once people believed that women were not as competent as men, not anymore. And I hope in your students' life, you will be able to say, once people believed in war, not anymore. Thank you.
As you can guess, there are thousands and thousands of people whose lives have been changed by even hearing Frances Crowe speak once. And Allison and I are representing those thousands because she totally changed our lives. In fact, I'm going to surprise her. So, Frances, this Sunday, as I was talking to a friend about what I was going to do this week, he said, I was one of the people sitting in a circle in your living room.
In my basement.
It was in your basement. And so here he said his wife came up to you in a grocery store. This probably happens a lot, so you might not remember Caroline Mack. But she began to cry, and she said, you saved my husband's life. You saved my husband's life. And Richard Clarity said that what was happening is he'd already gone for 3 physicals, and he'd been in ROTC. When I tried to picture it, it must have felt to him like he was on an escalator that he couldn't get off of, that he was going to end up as a soldier, but you changed that. And one of the things he said that was so wonderful is you helped him identify that he was really deeply against war. And it's interesting to think he hadn't stopped to that point to really sit and be able to know that about himself. And let me find his words. He said that you had it all laid out, that you needed a letter from clergy, so go down to West Hartford. And that thoroughness, your faithfulness, this is something that you've had throughout your whole life. And so what I'd like to do is to share 5 moments of the many that Frances has inspired me. And so that's what Allison and I want to do. We want to talk about Frances. And in fact, what I want to do is give you questions. So here's one. How does the social conscience of one individual get passed on? You know, what if we think of ourselves as part of a long line of people who've made a difference in changing the world? When I was a young girl, I wanted to be like Harriet Tubman. And it was this, to know that someone had lived their life to change slavery impacted me as a white girl. So a question that I'd like to give you all is there a person in history or alive today who sits at your shoulder? Because what happened for me after I met Frances is when I'd be about to do something, I'd say, well, what would Frances do? How would she think about this? So my hope is that in the course of this ethics talk of living an ethical life, you will think of who that person was, that you carry, maybe unconsciously, with you. The other question I want to give you is, at what age did you decide that you wish there wasn't war? Because I'm going to bet that everybody sitting in this room has felt that. Now, for me, when you talked about people hiding under their desks, I was one of those first graders, Frances. And I can remember exactly what I felt. I felt the adults were crazy. I said, this desk is not going to protect us. And I remember sitting in first grade, watching kids at school with those lunch boxes with the little straws, and they were making them into tanks, and I said, this doesn't make any sense. So as a 5-year-old, I was against war. And a friend of mine said, for him, he had a father who was in the military as a chaplain. And so he'd sit at the dinner table, and his father would say, if I catch you in any of those anti-war demonstrations, you were really in trouble, young man. And he held on to what was true for him. So I feel that there's this way in which people together of a common cause make a constellation. A constellation. And I want to offer this sense of how can you make your values and ethics so palpable to the people around you. So here's the first of the 5 ways that Francis influenced me. I figured out I was 28 and you were 57. And we were both staff at a 2-week Peace Institute up at Rowe Conference Center. And luckily, I signed up to go out on a boat at sunrise, and Francis was the other person in the boat. So on that boat ride, my life changed. One of the things you were saying to us today, I was writing it down, develop a vision of the kind of life you want to live. So as we were paddling the rowboat or the canoe, whatever we were in, that's the kind of things Francis was saying to me. So one of the 5 ways I want to highlight that we are mentors to each other is to share our thinking. So to be able to know how you thought of things. I remember that you told me about a particular magazine that I could get. Just like you went to that bookstore after the awakening, after Hiroshima, you were able to tell people specific things to read, specific opportunities. Now what happened for me, I went on to study conflict resolution, and I was the first peace education coordinator at Traprock, which I'll talk about later. Now, what happened is that there weren't graduate courses in conflict resolution, and I think that I probably taught the first one. It was in the 80s. And so we were asking ourselves, if we take Get Into Yes, the famous book, and we say, how do we apply these international principles to young people? So I started a peace camp. It's now been going 22 years. And what we do is I say, if you want to come to this camp, there's 5 promises you're going to make. And you can look up training camp and see the others, but let me tell you one of them. One of them is, if you have a conflict, I want you to agree ahead of time that you're going to talk it out instead of fighting it out and instead of ignoring it. And it's particularly, you might know in your own lives, what I think is the hardest part is that sense of ignoring it. So one of the meanings for me of peace education is, in your dorm, if there's a person who's doing something that doesn't feel right to you, how do you get the courage? So it's not the 2 extremes, the shark. I can't believe that you are waking up at 5 a.m. and you're, whatever it might be. But instead you're saying, can I talk to you about something? It's that fantastic folk tradition that we're passing along of what does it look like in daily life. So that's the first thing I want to say, that Francis showed me, what does it look like day after day? And when you made the commitment for the rest of your life, you're going to work to stop war, I decided I would make that commitment too. And I've never regretted it. So the second way that Francis influenced me was through continuity. So the question is, how do you put something in place that's going to continue? Today, all 3 of us are trying to give you snapshots of things you might not have known about. So in the 80s, Francis and others came together and said, we want to start a necklace of nonviolent centers all over the world. And we're going to start the first one in Deerfield at Woolman Hill. Francis was a founder. We were on the board of Traprock together. I'm on the board again. And now the name is Traprock Center for Peace and Justice. And that kind of continuity of saying, we want for generations to have something. Now, one of the things that the snapshots I want to give you is sitting in Francis's living room. You can imagine all the people who have come through that living room in the basement and the AFSC office there. It was 1980, and Ronald Reagan the returns were coming in. We're all sitting there to see, how's this election going to go? We want to be with Francis at this moment. So Reagan won, but at the same time, there was a victory that she talks about in her book, which I really hope you get. And in it, you were saying that there had been these referendums on nuclear moratorium at each state congressional district in Western Mass. And as the returns came in in every district, the vote was for the moratorium. There are so many people I wish I could show you. I want to show you Randy Forsberg. Randy Forsberg registered for courses at MIT so she could learn the same things a person was going to learn if they were going to build nuclear weapons. Of course, she was trying to figure out how to stop them. So she figured out if you take out the trigger, then the nuclear war is inactive. The weapon isn't inactive. She also said, well, at least we could ask for a freeze. So that was this, you can see the ingenuity of Frances figuring out, there's got to be some way to do this. Now, the application for me was that you were saying we worked together to start, we also started the Women for Survival. And one of the things we did in Women for Survival is we wanted to create Mother's Day marches in the original spirit of Mother's Day. So let me give you a half a minute of a speech by Julia Ward Howe that you might not have known. Julia Ward Howe started Mother's Day. It was started as a day of peace. Here is the voice of Julia Ward Howe, who I know you particularly like. Here we go. Arise then, women of this day. Arise, all women who have hearts. Let women now leave all that may be left of home for a great and earnest day of council. Let them meet first as women to bewail and commemorate the dead, and then let them solemnly take counsel with each other as to the means whereby the great human family can live in peace. I earnestly ask that a general congress of women, without limit of nationality, be appointed. I ask that this group meet at the earliest period, and that we will promote the alliance of the different nationalities and the great and general interests of peace. So Julia Ward Howe sits on our shoulders, and she's asking, how can we bring back that original sense of Mother's Day? The third way that Frances affected me was that sense of direct mentorship. When I worked at Trap Rock, with a friend, we ran an 8-week internship. Now, I don't think these exist as much as they did back then. So I want you to be able to picture young people on the lawn. You're sitting on this lawn of this beautiful location of Woolman Hill, and Frances is talking to you just as she's talked to you today. And a Hampshire College student said, Frances, you are one of a number of speakers we've had, but Frances, every person who spoke to us today said they got this way because of you. Every speaker said that you had influenced them for their peace work. And what happened was that during that week, I had applied to be a kindergarten teacher, but because of the way you had helped me shape my conscience, when I was sitting there running this internship and I got a job offer, I said, I can't take it. I have to, even if I'm a volunteer, I have to just spend every waking hour working with Trap Rock. So I started a practice of praying each day that I could do something to end nuclear weapons. And I went up to the director of Trap Rock, Randy Keeler, of course, who was appointed to now be the National Nuclear Freeze Coordinator. And he said, well, there's something. I said, you're about to leave. I'm helping to try to fill in your place. Is there anything that you didn't get to do yet? And he said, took out this box of these 3x5 cards, and he said, I think what we need is we need a series of flip charts so that anyone in the country can talk intelligibly about the problem of nuclear weapons. Right now, people say to us, well, what do you know? yes, you say you're against nuclear weapons, but you're not a scientist. And so we created, I worked like 16-hour days. It was really crazy for a couple of years until we had these made. And one of the moments I've never gotten to tell you before is that I had to interview artists, and our major artist, Peter Laird, while I'm looking over these flip charts that came to be, these gorgeous charts, he said to me, well, I want to show you this other project I'm involved in. I'm drawing cartoons of turtles with combat gear. And so Peter was both the creator of the Ninja Turtles, and he was also the major artist for the nuclear freeze flip charts. The fourth way that Francis affected me. On this back, you won't be able to see these pictures, but afterwards, I'm going to put them over there on that table where it says Women's Heritage. What this shows is Frances is climbing over a chain link fence. It's 1983. She is 64. And where this is a little town of Seneca, New York. And this is the place where the greatest Euro missiles were stored. These were smaller. And so we wanted to create a solidarity with the women at Greenham Common. And so there were, I guess, about maybe 8 of us in an affinity group that drove there the 10 hours. And we went over the fence. I'd like you to be able to picture what it was like the moment that Frances went over the fence. There was this, it was electric. Anybody who had been wavering as to whether they wanted to participate in civil disobedience that day said, I will be there. So we went over the fence, we were handcuffed, we were put on buses, we were taken, and when they came to take my picture, I was so beaming that the picture didn't work. They had to take another again. Okay, I'll calm down. But it was this feeling of exuberance. And one of the things that happened for me was that a woman came up to me at Seneca. I don't know if you know this story. She said, I saw the flip charts that you did. I'd like to fund your next peace project. I'm independently wealthy. And I said, well, what I want to do is I want to work with young people. And it led to this book, An Outbreak of Peace. And in this outbreak of peace, try to condense the story. I invited young people during their school vacations to come and draw with me pictures of the world we want. And then what happened is, so it could be just a free project. Anybody could come do it. And then a girl would say, well, I loved this. I'm going to invite my younger sister because she has nuclear nightmares every night. And so pretty soon, this is like a Francis story. As you would guess, the group kept growing. And so we had a 4-year project. And it led to this book. And I made them a promise that everybody's drawing would be in there. As I was writing it, I had this awakening that the most important thing that I wanted to work on was not stopping nuclear weapons, but stopping racism. And so I redid the whole book so that the major characters were African American, Japanese American, Puerto Rican. I would wake up in the middle of the night and hear my characters talk to me. You're talking about white peace, but what's peace for everybody? And so when this won a National Peace Award, and I got to speak on TV and radio, I made a promise that every moment after, if I was teaching graduate school, every speech I would talk about racism. And there's a person that I bet we all 3 admire, Peace Pilgrim, and she talks about find your place in the peace puzzle. And so I began to have a differentiation of not continuing civil disobedience, but what I loved was Francis continued to respect the way that I was working for peace, and that I felt that I had to become a trainer to try to unlearn racism, and that I had to really focus on young people. At Journey Camp last spring, one of the people that I worked with for 8 years went into such a deep depression that she died of suicide. And I made this commitment to her friends who were very vulnerable that I would create a group, and we're meeting this Saturday. So we've met since September, every month. And they named it Constellation, with that sense that it can be hard to be true to yourself in this culture. And I believe that that was definitely a big part of her depression, and that we didn't want to lose anybody else. And so that we meet monthly, and I call it, we strengthen our life muscles. And there's a song that we do. Michael, you were asking if I would do some sort of, at least short singing. So I wrote out the words, Allison, because we got to sing together recently. So you have not heard this song, but let me get this. Now, all of you know about what happened in Newtown, Connecticut, at the Sandy Hook Elementary School. So that night when I heard, sort of what works for me is to try to make a song that will respond. And then that song went out on YouTube. Friends and I founded the Children's Music Network, and one of the people lived nearby, so she asked if I would sing this song at Newtown. There was a gathering of many, many people in town in one of the gyms. So this is the song I sang to respond. Hold hands and stick together. Hold hands when something shatters. Hold hands, you're not alone now. Hold hands, our hearts matter. If you are so moved, will you sing with me? Alison, will you stand up? And oh, you're holding, Francis is singing too. This is great. There's a mic right there. There's, I think, 2 mics. Hold hands and stick together. That's sort of like the basis of what we're talking about here. Hold hands and stick together. Hold hands when something shatters. Hold hands, you're not alone now. Hold hands, our hearts matter. I'm going to add a chorus that really speaks to how I experience Francis. Whatever age I be, I will follow what's true for me. Oh, the world can't change me. The truth inside has claimed me. I must do what I feel is true. We're going to sing that once more time, but as I close this talk, I want to say the 5th way that I'm hoping that Frances will now be in your constellation. So she's been in my constellation for 35 years. And that when you are taking an action, you will say to yourself, what would Frances do? So I'd like to sing this part to dedicate it to Frances. Whatever age I be, try those words, whatever age I be. Here we go. Whatever age I be, I will follow what's true for me. I will follow what's true for me. Oh, the world can't change me. Oh, the world can't change me. The truth inside has claimed me. The truth inside has claimed me. I must do what I feel is true. I must do what I feel is true. I must do what I feel is true. Thank you, Frances. I'm so happy to now pass to Allison. And Mike, thank you for this whole idea of these generations of people speaking.
I find it a little funny that we had handwritten notebook, typed folder, and I admit I'm going to be looking on my phone with my notes. I want to first explain how meaningful it is for me to be here on a panel of two women whom I actually know. Thankfully, I met Sarah last October at a peace gathering. We sang together. And Frances, whom I'd met, I believe, 6 years ago now. It's really an honor to be in their company, and I'm humbled by the great work that they have done in their lives for peace in varying fashions, and the way that it has influenced me, I hope to share a little bit right now. And I want to show an image of a mandala. This is a Buddhist and Hindu ritualistic religious symbol that I did not color this one. This was a professionally done one, but I've colored it as I've taught art a couple times, and I find it very peaceful to create these. They're very symmetrical, emitting from the middle, and generally very colorful. And it relates to some of the themes I'd like to talk about in my reflection, relating to who colors your life, how some things can feel full circle, as well as the ripple effect of a person or an event. I first heard about Frances Crowe before I met her. I was fortunate to go to this community out in the woods in the Quabbin Reservoir called the Agape community. I'm not sure if some of you are familiar with it. It's hard to describe without getting some funny looks, because we go out into the woods and we dance around fires and we chant and we laugh and generally have potlucks. And it's honestly one of my favorite places on the planet. And it's a Catholic lay community that is interfaith and outreach, but very rooted in their Catholic tradition, as well as the values of simplicity and sustainability. And I stumbled upon it as a sophomore at Smith College. I saw a flyer and I called and I said, I want to come. I don't know what to expect, but I ended up staying the whole weekend overnight, and it was one of the most transformative weekends that I've experienced. And while I was there, I said I was from Northampton, I go to Smith College, and they said, well, you must know Frances Crowe. And this is how I heard her name at least brought up 3 or 4 times before I'd actually met her. They said she's a very outspoken female peace activist in Northampton and someone that you should meet. And I returned to Smith with her in mind, as well as some new questions that I'd never really sat down to ask myself before. And Sarah, you mentioned the question, when did we first ask ourselves how we felt about war? I think I was 20 years old when I went to Agape, and I admit that was the first time. Even though my father was in the military, he was a little absent from my life, and it didn't really register as something that affected me until I was at this retreat and people were asking me, what do you think about war? What do you think about lifestyles that contribute to war, or the suffering of other people? And I became, I admit, a little disillusioned in what I felt like was an ivory tower as I was studying certain things. And these questions seeped into my academic interests as well, and I ended up self-designing my major in peace and conflict studies and minoring in religion. And it was a couple months later when I felt very hungry again to be in an atmosphere where people were asking these questions, an intergenerational atmosphere at that I went back to Agape and I met Frances. I believe it was a St. Bridget's Day celebration. And I went right up to her because people said, she's here, you gotta meet her, she's here. And she gave me information on these Friday night movies, the documentary films that she mentioned in her talk. And I happily went a couple weeks later, and again,
reveled in the atmosphere that she created. Well, first, it was nice to have a common denominator. We all watched the film together and we dialogued about it. So we had some reference point to draw upon, but it was also a safe place to ask the really hard questions about warfare, capitalism. Lots of topics were covered in these Friday night gatherings. And I know I have never shared with you, because I actually didn't realize until I started reflecting for this talk that after the first or second film that I went to, I met two other women from Smith, and we walked back to campus together, and we were musing about the film and how it was inspiring to us, but particularly how our particular faith tradition spoke to this idea of peace. And I was speaking as a Christian, the other two women were Muslim and Hindu. And we went back and we sat in the dining hall and we said, is there any space on campus for us to talk about this? No, so let's start one. So we started an interfaith women's group that focused on social justice issues, dialogue, and service. And it was through your gathering and educational films that I got first, I think, the opportunity to get exposed to interfaith work, which is now where I hope my career path is continuing to head, working at an interfaith organization now in Boston. One moment. This is the advantage of writing things down. Relating back to the picture of the mandala and the ripple effect, I wanted to mention that my mother was also influenced by Frances Crow's documentary showings when she came to visit me for a parents' weekend. She is living now in a relatively small, quiet town in Florida, the east coast of Florida, and was so moved by the fact that people would get together on a Friday evening to learn about a topic of interest. So she started a movie group in her own hometown, my hometown, at her spiritual community there, a Unity Church. And that lasted for a couple years, and it again rippled out and touched the lives of many other individuals. I think, well, I don't just think, I know that Frances had a very formative impact on my identity as a young college student. I witnessed her standing up, unafraid, speaking out for peace in what I find to be a society that tries to quiet that voice because it's not practical. I think it's important to be critical and nuanced in your approaches to peace, which I found Frances was. She addressed the complexities of the issue, and she stood up and she spoke about it in varying fashions, and one of which was through her lifestyle. As she mentioned, I see it as a full-bodied piece in a way, and a self-reflective piece where she looked at her own life and said, how am I contributing to these larger forces that I'm trying to fight against? And I would often run into Frances Crow walking past Smith campus and refusing to drive her car. So we would run into each other as I was generally rushing to the dining hall or to a class. And her full life testimony, as well as the Agape community's full life testimony, certainly shaped how I've tried to live my life after graduation. I live in a cooperative household now in Jamaica Plain in Boston, and it's very comfortable, but it's certainly a daily challenge of conflict resolution with so many different personalities in the household. And I admit I'm now asking myself the questions, how do I progress in what I hope to be a career path and avoid certain spirals of society, getting really wrapped up in bills and technology and driving, and where's a balance of wanting to go back to this, asking myself, I hope at least once a month, checking in, how is my lifestyle speaking towards a peaceful way of living? And headed towards the future, my hope actually is to go to divinity school with a focus in public policy. And I have no doubt that I will carry the influences of Frances and Sarah and Agape in my academic journey further. And it's really, as I mentioned in the beginning, a real gift to be here on a panel with them. So thank you.
And I know personally it's been a great honor to be introduced to the three of you and to get to know you and hear your stories over the course of the last hour or so. And I'd just like to thank everybody again for coming and listening to all these wonderful women and their stories. And just a reminder that there will be the literature that's out, and there's a few refreshments in the hallway. And thank you again for the Futters for being here and honoring the whole ethics program. So thank you, everyone, for being here.